So we shared, so we shared building maps with principals, asking them to update it on current use as opposed to what was originally done. We are scheduling a meeting with all principals right after the holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. So we're doing some preliminary work so that the uh, board facility committee can meet with the architects twice, once a little early on, once some of that preliminary work is put together. We would be looking at something during the week of either December 9th or December 16th, and then doing some more background work and then meeting with that committee again mid to late January before the report is finalized at the end of January. So that work is underway already, and they have committed to having that to the board. They want to have it finished by the end of January.
Students, do you have any highlights to share? Cindy, they have something that they shared with you. Okay.
Right here.
Okay.
Our student report, and it's mostly like Harwood happenings of things that are going on. Yeah.
All right, so the first thing is we had the blood drive on November 6th, where the Red Cross worked with us in the middle school gym, and I'm not remembering exactly how many donors we had, but I know we got a lot of blood, and that blood is being used to help people out who need it. So it's good.
And then we want to talk about the India trip. So 5 students are currently on a 3-week-long trip to India in the Himalayas, and they're working with college students to make like a documentary. They're doing a lot of hiking. So our fellow student rep, Ellie, that is where she is right now on that trip. Yeah.
So our next assembly was supposed to be on the 17th, but it got moved to the 25th. So there could be some more time to prepare because there's been some, um, there have been, there's been staff interpretation of student, discourse that, we've prevent, but it's on the 25th now and there's a spirit challenge and yeah, we have a part of the assembly crew that's working on videos now, and they're a video series ending with a big finale, but also spoken about previously, which allows students to meet with other families from other countries, and they would exchange. A student from there would come here and.
Would you like me to say something? Yes, Rotary Student Exchange is starting up between the Mad River Valley and the Waterbury Rotary Club, and we are going to have an informational meeting. So Cashel and Grady have graciously volunteered to help make an announcement for us. We're looking for freshmen and sophomores who may be interested in going overseas during the 26-27 school year because it takes at least a year to get all the paperwork done. But then both clubs are also looking to bring students from other countries here. That could happen as early as next year. So that will be one of the announcements that they are helping us do at the assembly.
So on October 29th, the student government, which I'm a part of, sent out a survey to the entire school, just like asking opinions, how the school year's going, that kind of stuff. And then we looked over the results, and now we're trying to figure out which one would be a good one for an all-school dialogue, which is I don't know how much people know about the all-school dialogues, but it's like sitting together. Kasha knows a lot about it. He might be able to say something. Sitting together with your TA and then just having a Harkins discussion, which we had some of those. And then taking what we learned from those, hearing the student voice, and then using it. And some of the common themes were better or more food for the cafeteria, which I mean, like we haven't had the salad bar recently, so I can understand that one. And then some better facilities, such as like the sports area, the auditorium. Some of the people had talked about better bathrooms, just their topics for discussion.
And we just wanted to share that as student reps, we've been working with the administration to talk to some other schools that have reached out to us about the phones. And we've been in some like Zoom calls, and people have visited the school, and we just gave our experience as students with the procedure.
On last Friday, we spoke with Colchester, and then there were 2 state legislators in the call as well. And we just shared our experience with the process of creating the dialogue and creating the process and ideas that led to this in place, and then also the effects that we noticed as students and what we hope to see and what we actually saw. And we've spoken with CVU as well and with Montpelier, and we hope there'll be more.
That is great. Actually, we heard about you when we were at our conference because you'd already talked to CVU, I think, and they were singing your praises. Well, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Next is Dr. Mike.
Or if you can take that down, I'm gonna.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you for the update. I have a couple questions, actually. One, I'd be interested to hear how just an update on cell phone policy, how that's going in terms of your experience, or if you've been talking with other students. And then the other piece is curiosity about the staff interpretation of student discourse issue. Like if there's anything more you want to say about that here.
Well, I mean, I've got answers for both of them, and you guys can say stuff as well. But so for the phones one, it's pretty similar to what it was the beginning of the year. Just there's people who are less mad about not having their phones, are starting to get used to it, but still the kids who are on it and they're getting in trouble. And then there's the kids who aren't on it and they're using their pouches, kids use it in the phone, in their cars, people who just leave it at home. And it really just depends on the student, and people are adjusting. And then on the topic of the student discourse, it goes along with the idea of no phones, where the kids who are causing issues now were on their phones during assembly, so they weren't causing issues. Now that they aren't on their phones, they're bored, they want to do more things, and then they're loud or they goof off, and I know it's angered some staff members. I don't know if you guys want to.
About the phones, I would say I no longer hear anybody like talking about it at school. Like nobody's complaining, and everyone's just like, that's just how school is now. And yeah.
Speak on the student discourse a little bit. Various sources that it's mainly concentrated with this year's sophomore boys, which they came into high school after middle school with no phones. They had their phones, and then this year their phones were taken away. So it's been 2 quick transitions, and I think it's rattled them significantly, and they're struggling with that. But there have been different little sects in each grade that have had trouble. And actually my class met as a group with some of the boys in leadership positions, and we talked about how we would be able to prevent this and try to stand up and keep people from acting out. But we'll see what happens on the 25th.
Anyone else have questions for the students? Okay. Okay, Dr. Mike.
Thank you. And one item I did not have in my report that I want to make sure that the board is fully aware is that yesterday in the Burlington Free Press, there was an article of the top 10 elementary schools and middle schools as U.S. News and World Report just released their best elementary school list. And I think it is noteworthy that of the 10 elementary schools in Vermont, of which there are quite a few elementary schools, we have 3 on the list. We have at number 3, the Waitsfield School, at number 9, the Warren School, and at 10, the Moortown School. So I think this is pretty incredible news for our school district. And while the lists like to highlight top 10s, I do want to highlight that Cindy found, I could not find the ranking on Crossed Brook, but you said there were 16. And while it wasn't yesterday, this was released previously. Harwood is listed as 12 in high schools in the state. So I think as a school district, while we always want to make academic improvements, I think we can be proud of the schools and the students we have and the teachers who are doing the hard work to produce really strong results for our community. I also shared previously the superintendent report, and I am happy to take any questions on the superintendent report. I highlighted a number of items. One was the UVM Outstanding Educator Program, which I attended on Thursday, November 7th at University of Vermont. We had our teachers represented, and I also want to highlight that previous Teachers of the Year, so ours were outstanding educators. So each district gets to nominate 2 outstanding educators. And then from another kind of process, the Teacher of the Year is selected. And while our 2 teachers are not currently in the Teacher of the Year, we did have a previous teacher from the Warren School, Katie Sullivan, who was involved in part of the selection process. And she was also at that event. So I just wanted to highlight that. Act 139, which is a new law passed by the legislature in reference to literacy. That was passed, and I included some information there information that principals have to share with our communities related to literacy and testing. Beyond property taxes occurred last night. I know that's on the agenda for later. I also had a reminder of our Thanksgiving week and some of the impacts next week. And then I did also, I still like to keep running track of our restraint seclusion numbers. So I highlighted the last 4 years now, the last 3 years plus this current year. And we used the 21-22 year, the year before I arrived here as superintendent, as kind of our base year. That year, 69 restraints, 19 seclusions. Last year at this time, 3 years ago. Last year at this time, we had 10 restraints, 0 seclusions, and this year we're at 9. So while we want to continue to see a downward trend, it is 1 down, so that's positive, but we still want to continue to do work. So I think that was good information that I wanted to make sure we continue to highlight. So happy to take questions on that or anything else. And I see we have 1 hand. There are 2 hands.
Mike Bishop first.
Great, thanks. Mike, did you just want to touch base just because it's timely? You and I have been speaking offline a little bit about that other way that students can come here that you're working on. It may be more of a long-term thing, but since you brought up the other exchange student program, did you just want to touch base about that or talk about that real quick?
Mike, thanks for the reminder. So there are other ways. We have student exchange students here for other ways. So one of the ways we currently have students who come to Harwood is there's 2 private exchanges that they are able to come to Harwood. They handle the private organizations handle those pieces. There's often fees attached with that, which is one of the reasons why Rotary wants to be involved. But there's another way. There is something called the Student Exchange Visitor Program, which is actually through the Department of Homeland Security. So schools can directly bring students here and approve them through the security processes. You can come for 1 year. You have to go through a pretty extensive process to become a CEVIP certified school. Harwood has not been in that program. There are some, not a lot, but there's some in Vermont. My last school district, we had a process where we could accept students. We had, the last one I can remember was from China. So that's a program where we can actually issue the I-20 for students and charge tuition for students who wish to come. It's only for a year, but that's something that I've started to like I said, it's a pretty, there's a lot of red tape. Once you have the program, you have to meet with someone from the Department of Homeland Security early each year who reviews the process. So I have started that process here, and I can bring you more information later. But it is a lengthy application, and there's other pieces that have to be checked as part of that.
Jonathan?
Mike, regarding those rankings, great job. Obviously, we're doing something right and to place that many schools in the top there. I wonder if we know, I haven't seen that, so that was my first glimpse of it, but I wonder if we know the methodology used to rank them, and might be interesting to see where the differentiators were and to see if those are things we could work on for, to bring everybody up to whatever Waitsfield's doing that the rest of us aren't doing. Maybe that we should look at those results and use them as a guideline to some extent. Some of it's meaningless, I'm sure, and doesn't take into consideration a lot, but it might be information, good information for us.
At my last school district, we paid a lot of attention to it and made some movement. There is a methodology. It sometimes changes, but it is published. I can share it with the board, and I've shared it with principals before, so that's something that we'll continue to monitor. But really good points, Jonathan. That's something that is certainly on our radar. Most of it's based on state assessment data and some other factors. There was a point in time when U.S. News was looking at closing the achievement gap and growth from year to year, particularly growth with students who are in categories, disadvantaged categories, economically disadvantaged, other ethnic, racial categories, and growth in those categories. So they change it yearly, but I'd be happy to send that to the board so you can see it as well.
Noticing in the article that it just says that it's essentially what you said, Mike, that it's proficiency levels on math and literacy. So I think you're right, Jonathan, to acknowledge it has its limitations. I personally think that they have great limitations. And those scores tend to correlate almost exactly with socioeconomic status. So I think that when we're ranking schools, it ends up putting them in a competitive kind of framework that's just not extremely helpful. And I think we have so many great things going on in our schools that are not captured by those rankings. Word of caution that I would not support having that prioritized as something we're trying to chase.
Point well taken. And I will also comment that this is a conversation, as we've been discussing statewide, some of the data regarding VTCAP state assessment data, that Vermont in general has not, we are in compliance with federal regulations, but we do not as a state carefully monitor that as other states do, such as Massachusetts, where they have very delineated standards and aligned curriculum as a part of that. And we have a lot of local control, local town discretion over that. So there's some criticism statewide in some sectors of the state about our assessment scores. But what I would say from my observation being here now 3 years is it is not as high of a priority from a state level as other places.
You want to speak, you need to come up to a mic, which you can come up to Life's mic right here or Cashel's, and you need to say your name, please. We have a member of the public would like to make a comment for those in Zoom.
Hi, I'm Jeff Brower. I am from Warren. I was not intending to speak tonight, but since you raised the topic of exchange programs, we have been hosting exchange students through one of the private entities. I believe you mentioned FLAG for the past 4 years. And in fact, our exchange student from Denmark is here with us right now. And I just wanted to suggest, as you evaluate and look at the Rotary program, we have found that there are differences between the various programs, even the private ones, in terms of the done for students to ensure that they are prepared to actually come here for a full year as a high school student. friends of ours had tried a different program, and they did not have the same experience and actually had to send the student back home. So I would just throughout the year, we gain a lot of support through those programs. So I just want to make sure if we're going to have the Rotary engaged in it, which I think is wonderful, that they are prepared to be able to provide the kind of support for students throughout the year and for the families throughout the year on both sides.
Thank you very much. Okay.
And just finishing up, I will just comment that I thank you for your comments as well, and I'll follow up. I would love to hear about your experiences as we explore this more, but I can share with the board the Rotary Youth Exchange. It's not just a local club that does this. This is an international exchange. It's organized. The regional organization is Essex, which is the Eastern State Student Exchange. So there's a very high, a very lengthy list of requirements. Rotary is one of the oldest exchange programs in the world. So there is a lot of strong criteria. As again, in my private capacity as just a citizen and member of a local Rotary club, I had to go through a pretty extensive training to be the school liaison, even though I had the training. So I had to go through their training program, and I had to go through their clearance process, even though I have my own clearance process as part of the state. So it's a very well established program.
Any more questions for Dr. Mike? Okay, next is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bobby.
And, also, I mean, there are lots of different exchange programs, but I know when I was a counselor at Rochester, we had Rotary exchange students, and my daughter's partner, it was a Rotary exchange student in Chile. So it yeah, had good experiences with it.
Thank you. We're going to move on to board reports. Before we get to the Finance Committee's report, I'm wondering if publicity or equity or anyone else has any updates or anything.
Well, I just want to remind the board that there are going to be a couple of meetings in December to kind of open houses to discuss school budget issues. One will be at Crossett Brook, I believe December 5th at 6 p.m. One will be a Zoom meeting, I believe on the 10th at 6 p.m. And just please encourage your friends and families who have kids in the school to attend and let their views be known.
Okay, Mike Bishop, Finance.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ashley. So my comments are actually going to be brief so we can get to Lisa's presentation and other discussions. So Finance Committee, as you know, has been meeting, working with Lisa to help her draft her budget, which we'll be looking at and talking about tonight, with the increases that we had, or what the board wanted to see from our previous meetings. We did the survey. We've been looking and talking about the results from that survey, and Steve and also Bobby have put together some really nice summaries over the data that we received from the surveys that is certainly going to be helpful for us, not only in the Finance Committee, but also in the big board as we take a look at these, these difficult numbers. So we heard Steve mentioned about the community engagement. We have some meetings set up for two in December, and then our plan is to have one in January. So these are meant to be a little bit more informal. So typically, in the usual format, we would do all our budget discussions, get a budget that we all agree on, warn the budget, and then we are required to have one meeting to talk about that said budget. Usually it's the night before town meeting. And so what we thought that we would do is actually have meetings a lot earlier. I think Duxbury does something very similar with their town meeting, where they actually have town meeting earlier to try to get information from the residents. And so that's what we're trying to do now, is by having these outreach meetings. We had talked about a couple different ideas. One would be each town maybe would have one in their own town, in their own community. Maybe that's too many, so we've narrowed it down to these three ideas. And we've talked about having it at, maybe at Black Cap Coffee in Waterbury, having one of them, and then another one down in the coffee shop in Waitsfield. We've talked about a couple different things. And so we have these dates set now. Holiday is coming up. We're going to lose a lot of people for the holiday. People, have their own personal family stuff going on. So we wanted to keep these early in December, and then one right after the holidays. What we need to do, though, is find out what we're going to talk about at these talking points. The finance committee has talked about having whatever the plan is going to be for this year. What's the plan going to be for next year, and then even adding a third year, and that's still in flux right now. I've been also hearing from people connected to Montpelier that there's a lot of ideas being floated around. No idea what's going to happen with that in January, but there's a number of things out there that a number of possibilities out there that could change our direction here in the next year. But right now, what we need to do is really fine tune what we're going to be talking about at these meetings. Otherwise, it's just us standing around looking back and forth at people. So we're going to listen to Lisa's presentation tonight, and then hopefully this will give her some feedback on other things that we've been talking about. Keep in mind, we also have the contract with the facilities to see what that would look like in case we move towards a consolidation. So all those things are happening right now. But we just need to come up with these talking points on what we're going to talk about. And I think that's going to come together after we hear Lisa's presentation, and then the finance committee meeting. We'll have another meeting next week to kind of fine tune these talking points. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, the first two meetings, the 5th and the 10th, that's a face-to-face in CrossFit and then a Zoom, but I completely agree with him that we should be doing a little more personal, the Black Cap coffee idea and the Three Mountain coffee idea, so that people could, maybe get a little more of our time and get more opportunities, and those can be in January. Steve, go ahead.
I just want to add that on the Finance Committee report, there was a link to the summary of the school budget questionnaire, and I've now sent around to the board an invite to a slightly fleshed out version of that, so everybody can read that.
Sorry, we can't hear Steve.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, there's an updated version of the budget questionnaire that everybody on the board has been given access to.
Did you hear that?
Right.
It's faint, but I heard you say that there's an updated survey link for us to all look at. Is that what I heard?
Yep, that's right. There's an updated survey. The sort of Bobby and Steve worked on it to sort of make it a little more meaty with a little more detail. It's good. It's a summary.
And Dan.
And Dan, sorry, and Dan. Steve can share it with you. Can you share it with Grady?
We have HUUSD Finance Committee School Budget Questionnaire.
And if I could add, you just go on the Finance Committee report on this agenda. It's a link to it.
Okay, I think we're ready to hear from Lisa. Anybody have anything for Mike Bishop before we do that? Okay. All right. You're on, finance lady.
So we've been talking about the 3 different scenarios. Just as a reminder, you go to the next page. The 3 scenarios, I've included all 4, but if we were loaded up the total budget with level service, that's with all the assumptions and the increases, increases to the salaries, the benefits, the health benefits, transportation, all the assumptions, we would be looking at a 3.5% increase. I'm rolling it up, or 7.3%. I'm sorry, $3.5 million increase, or a 7.3% increase. The board had asked me to focus in on the 3 lower ones, 2.5% year over year, 3% increase in level funding. And I know that everybody wanted to be able to see a line item budget. So what I've done, if you can go to the next page, these are the large categories that we are looking at targeting. I'm focusing on a 3% right now, and then whether the board decides tonight either to go the higher or the lower percentage, then we'll make those adjustments. If you go to, I'm sorry, if you click on that bottom link, go to the next, go to the back page. Back page, right up. Yep. Okay, and then just click on that bottom link. It'll open up the detail. Yep. So what I've done is I've done a line by line item detail by actual categories. I'm also working for the next board meeting. I'll roll this up in a different way as well to be able to share with you what it looks like for direct instruction, sped ed, administration, and I'll have a different view as well in addition to the one I'm sharing. Can everybody see that? I can, it's in the link, but I can share it with everybody right now. Yep. It's in the presentation on the 3rd page, the bottom link, but I can share it with everybody right now. That's okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I forgot. Sorry. Okay. So, this is a line item budget. What I put in is I put in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 24 expenses, our current fiscal year 25 budget. And then you'll see in the next column, which is column E, you'll see what the projected increases with those assumptions for the full level service budget, not level funded, level service. We would be looking at a $51.3 million budget, or a 3.5% increase. So what I've done is, instead of having a whole sheet of numbers, I rolled it up to be able to show you everything. That line in blue is basically a summary of what's below. So salaries, I just gave you a 1 lump number for salaries, and then benefits, and then debt service. And then you'll see dues and others. Those items below roll up to dues and others, so you can see the detail. And I know, Bobby, you had asked me, what's in these different categories, and I said I would bring this. So if so what rolls up to other purchases, services, or purchases and properties, you'll see the actual line by line categories that roll up into those large categories. So everything that's highlighted in blue is those large categories. I just didn't give you the detail because this spreadsheet would be so long for salaries and benefits and debt service. So it was just, I rolled those big categories up, and at the next board meeting, I'll report on those different categories. So column, that's the column E, F, and G, the orange column that's on top, those would be if I would assume all the assumptions moving forward for fiscal year 26. What we're looking at, the next 3 columns that are in green, is what I'm targeting for discussion tonight for a 3% increase, and what those target budgets would be in those categories. And I'm working behind the scenes. I didn't load it all up here on to be able to achieve those targets for those roll-up categories. right now, sharing any expenses to date for fiscal year 25 is, we're only through the first, almost to the second quarter. So what I wanted to be able to share with you is the total expenses for fiscal year 24, what we budgeted for 25, and then where we need to get to for 26, forecasting for 26. This would be, again, targeting a 3% year-over-year increase. It would be targeting a $2.1 million decrease in our overall operating budget. On a good note, if you go to the second tab, and we can go through line by line, when I was originally projecting a 3% increase, I went back and scrubbed our numbers and looked at, because we actually had an increase in head counts, and we looked at it today. Mike came to my office and looked at it today. We had an increase in head counts for tuition students coming into our district. So there was an additional 4 students from last year. So I can project an additional 4 students for fiscal year 26, because shifting and looking up those that are in 12th grade and those that are moving from PK 4 up to K, we would still maintain that number. So I increased our tuition, our K through 12 tuition.
And while Lisa's doing that, I will just share that keep that tuition piece in mind when we talk about high school choice in Vermont. When reviewing the agenda, Dan Rossioli asked me a question and raised a really good point that I did a really deep dive in, which resulted in a lot of conversations. But one of them was, high school choice, which is one program required by the state, versus tuitioning of students from districts who do not have operating schools. So some board members may not be aware that we went through all the numbers carefully, but this year we have about 30 students from Granville Hancock. And when you receive students from non-operating school districts, then you receive tuition as part of that. So that's what Lisa's referring to, but that's kind of a separate topic than what we'll talk about later in the agenda, but still relevant.
So when I mentioned the last time we were looking at only a 3% increase in revenue, I'm actually projecting a 6.7% increase in our revenue, which is great. So that's new additional tuition, plus our block grant was increased, which I'm thrilled about. So our block grant went up almost $296,000. So I'm thrilled about that. So that's 7.9%. However, where I mentioned this before, where I was projecting the health insurance costs at 20%, the number that came in for the increase for health insurance came in at 11.9, which is fabulous. But that extra that I had been projecting will now shift over, because right now we're looking at an increase in our sped ed expenses. So that extra cushion now could then go over to adjust those increases in our service plans for our sped ed. So we are still working on numbers. Of course, just as a reminder, when we develop a service plan for sped ed, it's done now in October for next year. Things can change all the time. So we always have to plan how we adjust for those numbers. I can go through line by line, but what I wanted to be able to share with you is columns I, J, and K are the targets that I am targeting to meet for those high categories. And next time when we meet, I will actually have numbers filled in based on what projection that the board decides to go with tonight, whether it be a 3% year over year, 2.5% year over year, or a 0% increase, which would be level funding the same budget as we currently have in fiscal year 25. So what just to share with you what I am doing behind the scenes is I've been scrubbing budgets and looking at our budgets to our actuals to be able to see how much we can be reducing below the line. And when I speak about below the line, it's operation. Anything above the line is salary and benefits. Anything below the line is operations. So what we're trying to do is minimize any decrease in personnel. We're trying to do that. Obviously, most of our budget is made up, 71% of our budget is human resources. So where we can reduce to achieve as much as we can below the line. We are looking at operations and maintenance. What I'm working with Ray is to keep everything at a minimum and what has to be done and what needs to be done. I also am including a $500,000 transfer to maintenance reserve. We still need to continue moving money into our maintenance reserve. We have approximately $2.7 million in our maintenance reserve right now. We need to keep continuing it. As a reminder, our deferred maintenance is over $19.8 million for immediate needs. And especially over the next couple of years, we're only doing what needs to be done. We still need to have that maintenance backup reserve for catastrophic, but then also what investments we decide as a board to make. Any questions so far?
Looking back at the budget projections, one specific and one maybe more general, but the specific one is just looking at the debt services right near the top and how if we were level service budget, we would give 714, but then with the lower budget, it's much lower. Just does that mean we're putting off payments that we should be made, or what does that mean exactly?
So if you look at fiscal year 24, we actually only had our debt for 683 was our actual. And remember, when I budget for next year, I'm budgeting now for next year. And at that time, I didn't know what the TAN was going to cost us in interest. So, we actually got a very good rate on our TAN. And I'm projecting and looking at and forecasting, I will be able to bring that down. And we do have a small payment coming off of our debt. So that's where I'm able to project a reduction in our debt service.
For anyone watching, TAN is the tax anticipatory note, which is what we have to have between the time when we start a new budget and the taxes start to come in for the year.
If you recall, we had a $3.5 million TAN that we went out to bid, and we got a very good interest rate on that TAN. And we also are earning, I'm projecting to earn more revenue on that TAN for this current fiscal year and next year. So I just want to be able to share with you again, the next meeting, what I'll have is two different two different displays of the budget, this line item budget, and I can also pull it in by school, but then I'll also have it rolled up to large categories: direct instruction, operations and maintenance, administration. Our system, eFinance, is not the easiest, and they don't have simple reports. It's a very manual process, but I know that is important to everybody. So I will be able to manipulate that data using pivot tables and to be able to bring that in and view it that way for you.
So I'm just trying to focus on, we want one number when we come out of this meeting that you'd like us to dial down on. Okay, does everybody get that? Or two and a half?
And just from Lisa and I talking too, what kind of the process this year, and we've had some conversations, we're meeting with our principals tomorrow. The process is very different than in other years. Normally, Lisa does all the pre-work, meets with buildings, establishes budgets, comes to the board with a number, and Lisa's predecessor would do that. But that was prior to last year when we were in more ordinary times. We are not in ordinary times anymore. So Lisa has been spending an inordinate amount of time doing some of the work she would do between, December and April, and really trying to look at those below the line costs, get them down as much as possible so that the increase is as low as possible before we have to look at full-time equivalent positions and reductions. So once the process is, once the board sets the guidelines for us, especially it's been helpful having the finance committee piece. Once the finance committee and the board give us some clear direction, then we can work with the administrative team on those above the line pieces and come back to the board with recommendations. Normally, we don't get that specific until the earlier meeting in January, the first meeting in January, because that's when we have more certainty with the what's being projected with the yield, also with our long-term weighted average daily membership numbers. So we have more detail in early April, because it is very hard to craft a budget in October, November that takes that's to be implemented in July of the following year. So Lisa's processes by design and necessity in many ways are somewhat reversed this year.
If you go to that second page, I just want to point out something on the revenue. Yep. You have to move it forward. Just so you can get. Oh. She's trying to find a Google. So one thing I just want to point out on the revenue projection page, you can just our ed spending increase is actually only going up by 2.2%. Head towards the bottom, which is actually very good. So that our ed spending, our ed spending, because we have more revenue coming in, our net position is not going up. If we were looking at the year-over-year increase of 3%, our ed spending, because we're projecting more revenue coming in, our ed spending is only going up 2.28%, which will help us, because remember, when we're figuring out our taxes, it takes in consideration our ed spending. So it takes our equalized pupil and we divide it into the ed spending. So that's a very good number that our revenue is going up and our revenue is going up. Our ed spending is not increasing as 3% of our year over year. So that's a good thing I want to be able to point out. Once I have the long-term weighted average and the yield in early December, then I will come back with projections for what our equalized district tax rate would be, and then how we would apply that to what we know. Again, CLA's common level of appraisal information doesn't come out until early January, so I won't have that, but I can at least plug it in to look at how it would be what we know of today.
Comments?
First of all, it's amazing, that you're able to do this and then developing a program that you can itemize and click on, and so we're very fortunate. I brought this to Lisa's attention. It came up last night at the panel discussion in terms of comparing apples to apples. And so when people are reading the per pupil spending figure in Vermont, they're not looking at the long-term weighted daily average. They're looking at equalize students, which is a formula that they don't use anymore in Vermont. So people are confused, and I don't know if there's how to approach that. You've done a good job where you try to explain the differences. But it came out last night. Someone was saying, well, I heard, the average pupil per pupil spending is 30,000, and then it was 24,000, and then we heard 22,000 and 13. So it depends on what criteria they're using for that. And I don't know if there's any way around that, if there's anything we can do, but it's confusing.
Go ahead.
Yeah. System of cost per student that we use. And the cost per pupil.
You can't hear the speaker.
Speak into it. You're the quietest guy there is. Go for it.
I'll try. Well, due to our cost.
Could factor it using our current long-term weighted average, but again, I won't have that long-term weighted average until early December. I could tell you what our cost per pupil is. Give me 1 second.
Lisa's just looking up that number.
So many spreadsheets open. I've got to find it. I calculated it. I'll tell you. But if you want to continue.
So while Lisa's pulling that, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. Is there any special food that anyone makes? Any special traditions? I think Cashel is.
Tell us what it's all about, Cashel.
This is not very original. My family likes to bring pies. Everyone brings a pie. And when we eat the pies.
It's a unique tradition on Thanksgiving.
Yes.
We bring pies, we eat pies. I like that. That's good.
We're,
We have
we're,
s-
we just said we would channel our former board chair who always tried to entertain while doing this. I'm wondering, so in my family, we always have, my wife takes the real cranberries, but some people use canned cranberries. It's also a big tradition. Is there any canned cranberries?
Got to be canned.
Yeah, okay.
She's admitting it.
Got to be canned. You got to leave the ribs on it for display.
You're right, like.
Leave it that way.
I'm not on.
Do you have a favorite pie?
I actually was quite against pies until recently. So I haven't had like the long-term experience as other people in my family have with the Thanksgiving pies. But well, it really changes every year. I think normally I go for it's like chocolate and raspberry. It's good. Good. I mean, yeah, exactly. That's why I like it.
We're not sure, Curtis.
While they're solving that, I would like Mike B specifically to tell me why everyone in this state refers to it as a chicken pie supper when there is no actual chicken pie. Mike B.
Are you asking me?
I am just you specifically.
Okay. Why it's a chicken pie dinner when there's no chicken? I have no.
There's no chicken pie, sir.
Oh, okay. Guess it depends on what definition of pie is.
What?
I think that's what that would mean. I have no idea though. It sounds good though. People may come if you say chicken pie. I don't know.
Thank you, Mike. I think you covered it.
Right, so using the last year's equalized pupil with only a 2.9% increase and then a 3% increase year over year, our weighted cost our cost our equalized pupil weighted cost would be 15,599. So it would be a 3.2% increase over the current year. But again, that's using last year's equalized pupil. So that's with a 3% increase in our budget and only a 2.2% increase in our ed spending. It would lead to a 3.22% increase in our equalized pupil using the current year's equalized pupil number.
Anyone have questions for Lisa? Knowing that we're coming out of this, trying to come up with a percentage. Go ahead, Life.
So Lisa, help me with this. If we're looking at the budget projection, I guess I'm seeing like around salaries and benefits. It looks like to go from level services to the 3%. That's a difference of maybe $800,000 salary and benefits. So am I interpreting that right, that the 3% would mean cutting that, and if we kind of divided that by cost per teacher, we're going to be looking at six teachers? Is that what you said? 6 FTEs?
Trying to achieve those target numbers below the line, and that's what I'm targeting. That's what I would be looking at. Yes. So that's why I put the categories so you can see, and you'll see the difference with just pulling in level service. We were looking at just salaries alone, almost a $1.6 million in salary increases due to our CBAs. That would be to meet that 3% year over year target. The increases would be 1.1 million. So
I would be interested in hearing from Mike, just thoughts on that sort of FTE cut and services.
One of the pieces too that we are working on to give a recommendation to the board, but we would be looking at a combination of all categories, not just teacher, but teacher, administrative, and support staff, where we can make reductions. But we are, after last year's reductions of 27.5 FTE positions across all categories, it is getting more and more challenging. But we are working. We do have some ideas. We've talked internally from central office perspective, just talking to some principals. We do have some ideas of where we could achieve some savings, but it is getting more challenging, and that we're not able to do it to the same degree through attrition as we were in the early part of last year, even though we went through, even with those 27.5 positions, there was a minimal impact to actual people. Most of those positions were either retirements or switches or resignations. So that is something that once we have the target from the board, we can come back with a more detailed plan of what that would look like.
We have one more guest from the public comment. Please say your name.
Elena Brower. This is in the above the line question. I realized that you're in the below the line. I was just curious, the health insurance, is that something that that is purchased by the school district, or is that negotiated and purchased by the state?
Just in general, the general protocols for the audience is for public comment before, so we don't generally have conversation with interaction. What I will say, because it is something that we generally talk about, is the health insurance plan that we buy into that is a state mandated plan. It's not within the control of the local school board. It's negotiated at a state level through the legislature, and those rates are set at, so there's a board through legislation. It's a 6-member board, 3 labor, 3 management. And if there is conflict with what the recommendation is for a new plan, it goes to arbitration. So this board has no control over either the plan or the costs of the plan.
Thank you for coming to make public comment. Okay. Any more questions? Anything? We're looking for a target to give these guys. So think on that. And then if anyone would like to suggest something, we can go there. Mike Bishop, you could do that.
Ashley, you're asking me for my comment on this. Is that right?
I am, yeah.
I think for me, I just want to hear what everyone else has to say. I'm taking it all in. You know, we've been working on this in the finance committee, and I know, you know, and I've said this before, these aren't great conversations to have. But you know, we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. And I'm curious to see what everyone else on the board has to say, just kind of their initial thoughts.
Okay, thank you. So in that case, why don't we take a spin around the room and see where everybody's at? Because we really just need to dial in on this number. And why don't we start with JB? Yep, the percent we're sending the finance group back to work on for Lisa to really dial down for our next phase, really.
Well, pursuing the 3% year over year.
Steve?
I guess I want to be comfortable with the 3%. I'm a little worried. I thought we were kind of under a mandate to cut per pupil expenditure. And I know Lisa can't give us an accurate number. And it sounds like we're going up, not a lot, but not going down. So I'm a little conflicted. I would like to go with the 3%.
I feel that conflict because I mean, that is, we're trying to do something that's tricky to do with the CBAs, et cetera. Why don't we hear from Cindy?
I'm in the same boat. As we look at our weighted average, you know, the number we don't have, if that number goes up, then does that make the gain lower or higher? You see what I mean? I mean, I don't know what I'm even looking for in the future, potentially.
If that number changes, yes, it could
Yeah.
go up or down. So
Right.
it depends on the weighted average, and we don't have that back.
No, but I mean the weighted average, that's the number we don't have.
Right, we don't have that, and I won't have that
Right.
until early
And if it
December.
goes up, I'm just saying that it's going to have some impact on
Yes.
our budget, one way or the other, up or down.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious, I still
Welcome
don't.
to my world,
we-
Cindy. Are you just, come on, this is
I mean,
budgeting, you gotta take.
I know, but I think we need to be kind of clear about what it is that goes into that weighted average. So are we at risk for our weighted average to go up or to go down based on who we are? We're at risk for either of those, right? Is that what you're telling me?
Right.
And
I don't have
okay.
the numbers yet. But remember, the weighted average is, there's a different weight for every student, whether it's pre-K, high school, there's it's the cost of students. So the high school students are weighted more, ELL students are weighted the most. It's 2.49%. So I don't have those numbers yet. We just submitted our, what's called a D5 and a D6 for our numbers. Then the state looks at that, does their magic. They send it back to Brett. Brett works on it, massages, and we just send it back again. And I'll have those numbers back of what the weighted average. But what Brett and I have been working on is making sure that we are capturing every one of our students. So we're in a little better situation because our numbers, our enrollment numbers pretty much have stayed steady. So I'm hoping that our long-term weighted average stays the same or slightly changes, but I won't know that. But again, these are budget projections. When I get that number, I will then come back to you in December. We have up until mid-January to vote on our budget. We can then always make changes, but it's a budget. It's a preliminary budget. So, and I hear your conflict, because we do want to drop our cost per pupil. That's something we've been up against, and there is penalties starting fiscal year 26. So what we can only do is what we know now, and then we can always make changes to the budget again in December.
So what I heard you saying is that it looked, just based on what we do know, the information we have about our own student body and everything, and the fact that it's staying somewhat stable in terms of numbers of students and everything else, then a 3% increase is going to give us an increase in our per pupil cost. Isn't that what we just said? We just said that it would be up to 15,000 per pupil instead of 13,000. Is that right?
So our cost per pupil, our weighted cost per pupil only went up by 3%. That 13,000 you're mentioning, that was the weighted state average
Okay.
across the
Right,
state.
I knew that,
That
yeah.
13,396 was
Yeah.
a part of my presentation last year if we were using,
Okay.
the state average. So that number was just put up there based on that slide to share with you what that average, the state average was. Our cost per pupil last year, so many spreadsheets open, gotta find it, was 15,250.
Mhm.
So it would bring this year's, with the numbers I just shared with you, it would bring it to 15,599.
Would stay about pretty
Right,
similar.
yeah.
Okay, that's thank you. That's really helpful. That is such that number, that statistic gets thrown out so many times. It's really important for us as board members to understand what it is goes into the calculation of that number. At some point, that would be helpful for me anyway, because I talk about this LWR, whatever it is, and I feel like I'm not a very good board member because I'm not able to articulate very well what some of those things are. That's a number that for me, it would be important for me to understand what it is. And anyway, that all being said, I would also go with the 3%, by the way.
So part of it too, that makes it complex, is that there is another factor that Lisa can explain better than I, but when you're looking at our cost per pupil, there's also a relational factor to where that average is and where other districts are. We need to bring ours in relation to others down, but it's hard to tell. What I can say is, just from anecdotally talking to superintendents throughout the state, I think most of us are heeding the advice of the governor and looking in that 3% area. So I think the lower we can keep that percentage, the better in the future. Now, I will also say, to echo some comments made by Mike Bishop in his his presentation that we are certain there's going to be changes. The commission I'm on is going to make recommendations. We have a whole list, but I am hearing a lot of talk about two pieces that will also make impact on this. There is a discussion of pretty serious discussion. We heard it last night from Senator Perchlik about an adequacy formula, which would be a way for the state to calculate what is the adequate amount that districts should spend when you factor in the Act 127 weights, and then say to districts, this is how much you get per pupil, that's not subject to voter approval. This is the adequacy amount. If you want to go over that, then you have to go to your voters. So there's a lot of talk about that, and how that would look it depends on which proposal you're looking at. That's one piece. And then there's another piece that they're talking about, which is allowable growth, and then saying you can only grow by so much per year. So I think the bottom line is that we really need to be paying attention to fiscal restraint and keeping increases as low as we can, and trying to trim where we can, which I think is the goal of everyone so far. And I think staying at that overall increase of 3%, is 2.5 to 3% is a good thing.
Last night, I shared with you the presentation I did at the panel. On that last page of that presentation, just for quick reference, and in other presentations, I also have the long-term weighted average weights. So you can look at that presentation, what I shared with you last night, and that last page gives you the weights to all the different students. So you actually then have that in front of you.
That's a great detail. Thank you. The last page of the of last night's slide deck thing. Okay, Life, let's hear from you on the percentage.
Yeah, I think 3%. I mean, if the governor's saying that, and I think there's going to be a lot of changes, but it seems like at this point, that's a good place to start. And it seems like it's a lot easier to then reevaluate and possibly cut more in January versus going the other direction. So 3% seems great to me.
Dan?
Using a similar train of thought as to what you just said. Right now, November 20th, we have a lot of known unknowns. Lisa's mentioned a bunch of them, but her spreadsheet or her presentation has several others that haven't come in yet as well. And then we have a lot of unknown unknowns, what the legislature is going to do. And because of those two things and the cost of living adjustment for Social Security being 2.5% next year, I'm going to stick with the 2.5%. And I think that it would be easier if we get good news during the process to add back in rather than subtract. So in other words, let's assume worse right now and hope for the best.
Thank you. Corey?
Well, thanks, Dan, because I was going to go with a 2.5, like you just, for those reasons. It's a good point. 2.5.
You, Ben?
I'm going to go with the 3. The reason why is because I can't see in this climate us adding in. And that's just because I know that if we have room, I can't see the school board in this climate as it exists, going, we factored it in. There's a smidge of room. Let's go ahead and tax our residents just a bit more. That doesn't compute with me, and it doesn't compute with our voters. So for me, starting off with 3%, if the numbers change, making sure that we pull back appropriately feels a lot better than starting off with something conservative, knowing that we're not going to add back. So.
I'm going to go with the 2.5, knowing that we could add in if it looked like the climate was right and the numbers came in right with the weighted average. I've got to say that if you'd asked me a month and a half ago or when we started this process, I was thinking 0. So I've increased.
Okay, thank you. How about Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm exactly with Bobby. And I had expressed before 0. I think we have to be really sensitive to, our voters, our taxpayers in our district. I think that there are definitely a lot of unknowns here, in terms of what's going to be coming in, with so much pressure on our House reps and our senators. But I think that we need to play it as safely as we can. I also believe that we haven't really done the work we need to as a group to understand what those key cost drivers are and why we are essentially per pupil up against that ceiling, and that is a risk. I still don't feel like we've identified to go out to our voters in terms of how systemically we're going to go after that in the next 2 to 3 years, while all the other legislative changes are in flux. So I'm going with 2.5.
Thank you. Danielle.
Pardon my voice. I have a raised and cold. I want to question the value of continued exercise with so many gaps. It feels like, and I'm paraphrasing, but Lisa's time could be better spent on some other things right now than continuing to work up more on this until we've got some of the gaps filled. That said, I will not profess to understand even a minuscule amount of what she does to continue to work on this for us. So in light of what others have said, and out of respect for the fact that there may be people more savvy than I would also have to say 2.5 for the reasons that have been expressed.
Thank you. Okay, Tori.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having camera difficulties right now. I am gonna say 3% just because I agree with what other people have previously said. I think it would be easier to pull back than find out that, maybe we have more maintenance costs or we need that extra 0.5% or whatever. So I'm gonna go with 3 for now.
Thank you, Tori. Jonathan.
I think I'm gonna go. It's really tough. If we knew everything, it would be a lot easier, and the decision would be. I would feel better about it, but I feel like I'm gonna go with 3 just because we don't know anything right now, and that gives us room to move back if we need to. So 3.
Thank you. That leaves Mike, Bishop, and myself. Mike, do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 2.5, and I'm only going that way because I feel that I'd rather look at the worst case scenarios now, and then if we can avoid that, then at least we've already kind of laid that map forward, and so I'm gonna go with the 2.5.
Wow, it feels really close to it. It looks like a tie. Hold on, let me just read that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 threes. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 2.5s. That's 13. I am gonna go for 3 because for many reasons that were said tonight. I think it's so close, but I also feel like adding is going to be tricky. So that is 8 threes and 6 2.5s. So boy, that's awful close to make that choice. But how about 2.75? How about 2.75? That's
I'll second that.
If we got a second on that, I would also go for that. I think that that's so close. We really want to represent the board here. Go ahead, Life.
Totally love it.
Can I just ask, what is the time differential for you, Lisa? Like, have you already done a lot of work on 3 and it'd be easy to move that forward, or is it you're starting from scratch either way?
It would be just it would just be tweaking what I have. And I'm giggling over here because everybody's like, well, if we knew the knowns, what are they? And then, welcome to my world. I'm just giggling because budgeting, that's all about budgeting. But I I can do 2.75. And Danielle was asking what I need to do. Mike and I and the administration need to go back and to be able to develop a plan to be able to come back to you and say, here, these were your targets, and this is how we're going to meet those targets. So I can certainly come back with a 2.5, a 2.7, which be not a problem. But I just need that number so Mike and I
think
and everybody
we
can group.
Yep, and I think we really basically just arrived at 2.75. I mean, we're split. We're not gonna, yeah. So if everyone feels comfortable with that, does everyone feel comfortable with that? Oh,
Yes, I think that's a good compromise.
wonderful, cool.
And I would just say too, just to give you some feeling, I had mentioned earlier that normally the finance director meets early with the principals to develop budgets, and that has not happened. So our principals are feeling very, I would say anxious is a good word, to be part of that process. So we are meeting with them 7:30 tomorrow morning, and we need to start sharpening our pencils to determine how that would be achieved so we can come back to the board and give you that plan that you would feel comfortable with this budget. But there's a lot of work that Lisa needs to do, but there's also a lot of work that we need to have dialogue and conversation and input because it's not easy to reduce with our current footprints. So and reductions really go to looking at larger buildings. When you're a very small building, it's hard because our buildings are lean in that sense, but our in order to do it equitably, we just need a lot of time and conversation, and we need to feel that we're coming to the board with a really solid plan.
Okay, Steve.
Can I ask Lisa, this 0.25% cut from the budget you presented, what does that translate into in a dollar amount? Kind of one position?
Jonathan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as the longest tenured board member, this little act of close vote resulting in a compromise that kind of meets right exactly in the middle is just incredibly refreshing to me, and is a great example of how far this board has come in the last 3 or 4 years. And boy, I'm just glad to be a part of this and not have to deal with what we used to have. So great job.
And Dan, you're hitting them out of the park this week with all these great ideas. So thank you for that. Yeah, 2.75 seems like a collective opinion. It was. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. Our next discussion item is just a debriefing about last night, which was our panel discussion. Cashel, thank you for being part of that. And everybody, I think that we had 6 board members there. There were about 50 people spread out over the room, and there were 50 people watching on YouTube or whatever that was. And that was really great. That was so nice of Mad River TV to offer that and then to show up and do it and deal with it. And I got a lot of, well, I was in the audience, but I got a lot of texts from people saying it was really great to watch it online and have access. So, and thank you to Corey and Ben and Bobby and Cindy and those who were present. So, and thank you, Steve, for moderating. So why don't you tell us how you think it went?
Oh, well, I think it went a lot better now that I heard about the number of people who watched it. Because I didn't know if it was a good turnout or not. Sounds pretty good. So, we had a panel of 2 state senators and a ed funding policy expert and Dr. Mike. I thought it did a really good job of placing our district's budget issues in the context of statewide issues and even national issues. It was very nice to kind of, we're so focused on the details that it was very nice to get a bigger picture. I thought it was good news that the state senators indicated that ed funding reform seems to be a top priority for this year's legislative session. Possible changes they mentioned included shifting some ed funding away from property tax to state income tax, moving the burden of some mental health costs out of the ed fund, and reinstituting state aid or incentives for building maintenance. Like I said, possible changes. We'll see. In general, I thought Senator Gulick and Dr. Colby, the policy expert, were kind of big picture, long-term solutions. And Dr. Mike and Senator Perchlik kind of brought us down to earth and spoke about practical issues of policy implementation. So, I mean, for example, there was a lot of talk about switching some of the ed funding from property tax to state income tax. And Senator Perchlik said, yeah, please remember that when you shift taxes from bucket A to bucket B, it changes who pays how much, but it doesn't drop your taxes. And similarly, while consolidation is a long-term approach that was favored by the panel and favored in our community survey, Senator Perchlik basically said, yeah, well, you go to a meeting to tell people their school is closing. It ain't so easy. The question period had a really good mix of questions about statewide ed policy. There's a disconnect in the timeline for our budget and the legislative session as we're running into. And there were a few angry comments from taxpayers. Overall, I thought it was a good discussion. It was a tough discussion. And if you haven't viewed it, I recommend you take a look at the Mad River TV recording that's on YouTube.
Right.
Looking at it right now, looks like we're up to 222 views on YouTube.
I think that really shows how engaged the public is. I mean, we had meetings that we had 2 people at last year for the budget. So this is good. Any other comments about last night from anyone who was there or anyone who's watched it?
Watched it, and I heard a little bit from the other room, and I definitely think it was very helpful for it to be streamed online. It got a lot more people to see it than, as someone said over there, 223 now. But yeah, it was yeah. Yeah, it was definitely very helpful to have it be online as well as in person.
Agree with what Steve was saying. Was very encouraged about the idea of, maybe shifting where money comes from, that money that was in the general fund and then switched to the ed fund and moving it back, I think would be a good move. But it was very informative and encouraging to hear how many people actually saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, I found that section about the migrating over to the ed fund that happened was really interesting, and how it's kind of blurry now what goes where. All right, Life.
Yeah, that part was fascinating. I mean, what I took from that was about mental health, right? And so, we have much bigger challenges and investments required in that generally in our society, and just to see that, as services have been cut, you could say in the general fund, it's all shifted to education. So moving some of that back. I just want to say, Steve, I thought you facilitated just excellently. And Mike represented the district really, really well. So it was a nice event. A couple of takeaways I had, Tammy Colby and others. This is one of the big themes was just like Harwood can't do this on your own. right? Just that like there's just all these bigger forces at work, which I think we know, but I think that's good to see that message, hopefully, saturating a little bit more generally. I did have a couple of questions. I don't know if people can answer them. One was that there was this part where Dr. Colby talked about staffing to admin ratios, and she said that Harwood was kind of on one side of the spectrum. And I like listened to it a couple of times, but I couldn't quite parse out which side that was. So
She gave, I have that statistics in the office, and that's what she does. So we have a, I think, to the community who wants to see fewer administrators, we actually have a ratio that is in the state more few administrators compared to other schools. So but her point was that that's not statewide what we see. And my point was part of that is because of our system overall and our overall building footprints, and that we have smaller buildings. That's why we have more teachers. That's why we have more support staff. That's why we have more principals, and our numbers of principals are in line with State Board of Education requirements.
thank you. That's helpful. And I think that, on that point and many others, Dr. Colby in particular was just like very complimentary of Harwood and just saying like, we're doing a good job. And generally, that was kind of good to hear for somebody who's like studied this statewide and really has that context to say like, we're in pretty good shape. The other question I had is, something that she was pushing really hard and sounds like a strong possibility, as you just said, Mike, is this idea of this foundational budget, like changing the way things work. So there's a foundational, or I think you called it adequacy budget, that the state would say every district gets this amount, and if you want to go above that, then you got to raise it yourself. Do we have any sense on how that would impact us? Like, would that model? I can't quite figure it out because I know we spend slightly higher than average, but I also know we give a lot of money back to the state, right? To the general fund, or to the education fund. So any thoughts on whether that would be beneficial for us?
I don't think it's beneficial. I would say the Chair Bishop and the Finance Committee needs to continue to do their work and recommendations, because we're still going to be higher. We send more money to the state because we're a more well-to-do community. So that's the Brigham decision. People say we have a highly equitable funding system. We have highly equitable funding because we equally share the pain of the tax rate. How the adequacy piece of when you look at the weighting, it was the purpose of Act 127 to make sure that we're providing funding for districts with students who have needs that require additional funds. That's where we still have our challenges, because even though we have Act 127, and even though districts can access those higher funds, they don't always do so. So if you look where on that per student piece, where a Berry school district is, for example, they are still, their taxpayers are very frugal. So even though they have the taxing capacity to have more funding for their students at the same basic rate, they don't take advantage of it. So that's where statewide, where we are not as equitable, because we still leave that piece up to the choice of towns. And our towns have generally said, yes, we want to provide for our schools. That's a long answer, but essentially we Lisa and I still feel that we would still have to make reductions.
Thank you. Okay. Any other, Mike has one more comment. Any other questions from anyone? Go ahead, Mike.
I made a very serious comment, so I do have to say I received a message from Principal Korb at Waitsfield School. She was responding to a question that was brought up, and her message to me is, it's because they serve chicken and pie.
Very serious.
So we needed to end that discussion on a lighter note.
Thank you. Thanks, Kaya. We needed to know that. Deep questions at the school board level here. Okay, so next on our agenda is a policy first read on the equity policy G15. Has everybody taken a look at that? Do we have any comments? He has a question. Go ahead.
About the wording on the, oh wait, you said the equity policy? Never mind.
What was that? People got the memo that Life sent out? Or, sorry, I'm not. Why don't you?
I saw it as I was at a couple meetings that said, and I just assumed it went to the whole board, but we can.
Why don't you read it out to
share
us
that.
so we know what it is?
Sure, I can share it. Do you want me to read it? This kind of, or do
Go
you want to
ahead.
review it? Do you have, okay.
Okay. Yes, please.
Memo is being sent out that kind of gives some context to the policy. But essentially it talks about the committee, which was me, Tori, and Elizabeth. And then Mike was at every meeting as ex officio, and Ashley came to many as well. So thanks to the group. It details the timeline, just the process a little bit. So just a reminder that we worked on this May and June last before the summer. We had like 3 meetings of the committee, and then we kind of passed it off to Mike and the district to look at a draft that we had developed at that point and try to garner some feedback. And so there were some meetings, and then ultimately a survey that went out to the community, staff members, et cetera. And then we reconvened at the end of October, and we had a couple of meetings to process that feedback and then incorporate revisions. In the memo, there's also some design principles. So early on, we kind of like said, like, what do we want to do with this thing? And that was helpful to guide us to, remind us that we wanted to make it, broadly readable. We just wanted to be like thoughtful about terminology, not be jargony or things that are going to freak people out. We, drew on lots of different resources, including other policies. We try to be thoughtful about procedure versus policy. The other resources piece, I'll just also mention, it's not really highlighted in this memo, but when you see the policy, it's referenced a couple of times, this new education quality standards. Those go into effect July 1st, 2025. It's been a long process. And I think VSBA did a webinar on this a couple of days ago or something. But just the bottom line on that is that the new, these are kind of the top level regulations in our state that dictate pretty much everything else. They just have been infused hugely around equity. And so that's all going to hit again in July. And the VSBA was basically telling people, their concrete recommendations were make an equity policy and or revise it, because they had a model policy that was out, and the EQS like basically goes much farther than they had. So we drew on that throughout this process. And, I would say kind of big picture, like this equity policy in some ways is not as deep or heavy handed as the EQS will be. So to me, this is a way of kind of getting ahead of it. It's very much aligned. And the last part of the memo just there's a table that has notes on the feedback that we received. So it kind of has like, here's some of the big themes we heard about, and here's what we did about it. In some cases, it's actual wording changes or additions that we made. In other cases, we just kind of referenced either the EQS or other policies that we already had in place to show that those things are already happening. But the EQS is it's going to change things. And, one of the themes we got from the feedback, most of the feedback was very positive. But some of it was like, is this really going to do anything? It should get more specific. And, you know, this policy says we're going to form up an equity team, and that team is going to get going on procedures and outcome indicators and things like that. So in some ways, just like getting this so that the work can move forward, so that we're not, you know, waiting for the EQS to hit and then kind of like reacting, but we're getting out ahead of it a little bit.
I'm thrilled. I was in that VSBA Zoom about it, and we heard about it at the conference. It's happening, you know, and that policy has to be in place. So the fact that we actually have a policy is great. So, Steve, go ahead.
Yes, so I really like this policy. I don't usually expect policies to be inspiring, but I mean, this is very well written. And the one thing I had an issue with is the reference to this universal design for learning, which is in the third line of the policy, and then it's defined lower below. And I didn't know what that was, so I did a little search, and it's a design by a nonprofit called CAST, some acronym, and they've been around a long time. They seem, I mean, very reputable, and in fact, this universal design for learning has been written into some federal laws. On the other hand, in the federal laws, they say, you know, we should use that principles should be used kind of consistent with universal design for learning, or such as universal design for learning. And I think I would like language like that in this policy, because I don't think we want to kind of endorse one particular group's theory or program for addressing equity issues. So I just would like to recommend that modification.
Great. Appreciate that. We can totally do that. Yeah, I think that, you know, CAST is a group out of Massachusetts, and they really did a lot around accessibility and supporting students with disabilities. And now this framework that they created is really like spun off and become way bigger than them. So as you mentioned, I think the reference in here actually references the federal law, the ESSA. And so that's where we pulled that definition from. But if they have that kind of language, it's like, you know, this or something like it, and that's more comfortable, that's totally fine. I should have mentioned that the committee has a meeting scheduled for next week. So like definitely feedback, bring it. Because we're planning on doing at least another round of revisions. So thank you.
And
Yeah, Life, I just want to echo what Steve said. This is it's rare that you find this stuff speaking to you like poetry, and you guys have obviously wordsmithed the hell out of this, and this is really good stuff. So the fact that you guys are getting out ahead of it is just amazing. So just nothing to say but amazing work. So
any other comments on the first read of the equity policy? Other than Steve's mild modification? I don't see anything in Zoom. Okay, thanks for all your work on that, all of you equity committee members, because that's complicated. All our committees are complicated, but that one is particular. Okay. The other policy first read was F36 draft emergency medication. Is this where you have a question, Grady?
Yeah, I just had a question, just like a curiosity. Under the administrative responsibilities, number 3, is that like individualized medicine, or is that medicine that the school brings in that a variety of students could use? It says, other than emergency medication authorized by the Commissioner of Health, medication must be brought to school in a container labeled by the pharmacy or medical provider and stored by the school nurse or designee in a secure storage space.
Really good question. And first, this is one of our first round policies after the super team of Tori and Danielle have worked. So this is coming to us from recommended updates from the Vermont School Board Association. And so in answer specifically to your question, there are some medications that our nursing staff maintain, EpiPens for people who may have allergies, and they are, nurses don't have the ability to prescribe. So they come from, there's usually a standing order from the Commissioner of Health for things like that. But anything else that would be emergency medication may be something for a student who has a specific kind of reaction and needs something in the event of a need. So that comes through a process through their family and through their physician, their medical provider. I just had it up. Let me I also want to share with you just some information because we currently have a medications policy. The recommendation from the School Board Association is to delete that policy, which is also part of this, and to adopt this new procedure. And I've been I was in conversation with our nurses who were part of the statewide conversations because Allison Conyers and Clayton Wetzel are part of the board for the State Nurses Association. But I did reach out to the School Board Association for additional clarification, and this is what they said. Sandra Cameron, who's the person who works with their policies, said, and I knew this from Allison and Clayton, that there was a meeting with Vermont School Board Association, the Department of Health, and the School Nurses Association to talk about this change. So what the comment was from VSBA is that in discussions with the Department of Health and the School Nurses Association, there was concern about attempting to write a model policy that covered the myriad of issues that come up around over-the-counter and non-emergency medications. And she said, think sunscreen and other items as well. The school nurses have guidance from the Department of Health, and there was consensus that this model policy should focus only on emergency medications. Administrative procedures should address routine medications, and our advice would be to work with your nurses for alignment with the Department of Health guidance. So I think it makes more sense if you think back to some of the comments Cindy made about lice policy and things. There are certain things that change. So this is a case where if there's changes in best practice, that comes to our nurses from the Department of Health, and what they're saying is that should be addressed in that manner. And the board policy on emergency medication should only address those things that are the crisis period.
Okay, we're not voting on any of those, so that was just sort of touching on those. Does anybody have any other questions? Anybody in Zoom land? Good. Okay. All right, we're moving on then to our action items. We have a few things here. Well, he just talked about the deletion, and that was basically, yeah, those two are together. The first action item is to form a student use of electronic device policy committee. We have had members step up. Danielle, Tori, JB, and Ben have all agreed to work on that and deliver deliverables to us not until May. So I need a motion. Do we want? Okay. Yep. Unless Danielle want to make, oh yeah, we'll make a motion. Unless Danielle, you want to say something before that.
I don't know if you can amend it before there's a motion to even consider it. I think there has to be a motion first. So I'll find this.
So let's have someone make that motion.
Cool.
Okay, Bobby makes the motion and Dan seconds. Go ahead, Danielle.
I would recommend that if in the amendment, and my thoughts aren't going to be coherent right now, sorry, but that we seek representation from the student and faculty on the committee as well.
Great idea. How do board members feel about that? Any of you students want to step up and join this? This is about cell phones and electronics. You both Both Cashel and Grady are interested in that. Yeah, and I think that's a great idea. We definitely want this to be well-rounded and well participated in. Great idea, Danielle. Okay, no one has any objections. I don't want to just speak for everyone. Okay, so why don't we add Cashel and Grady? Oh. Oh, wow. All these reps want a slice of this. Okay. So first we'll form a student and faculty use. Wait, that's a little how do we do
I would have had to include students and faculty or something like it, to form.
If I can suggest, maybe just go back to form a use of electronic devices policy committee, and then parentheses, Danielle, Tori, JB, Ben, list the students, and then put a member of the faculty to be determined later.
Yes, thank you.
So just
So modifications to occur within the parentheses.
Yeah. To what Danielle has made, I'm just looking at the board's policy on committees, and it says that the membership, the committee chair and committee members shall be appointed by the board chair, subject to final approval by the board. Administrators and non-board members may also be appointed to a committee in an advisory non-voting capacity through the same procedure. So the board can appoint other people, but it's not an official capacity, it's an advisory capacity. Correct. And like our student representatives. So yeah, I think you're right though. I think maybe just make the board members this, because I'd want to check with the high school to see who they would want to appoint, the high school principal.
So just add and outside the parentheses, you can add and a faculty member to be determined or something like that.
That specifically teach them.
Oh, one of their teachers. Okay. You can take that out of take the faculty part out of the parentheses and just close parentheses around Grady. But you've missed an R or something, isn't it?
I mean,
Ashley,
yeah.
Am I allowed to ask a question about this right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I would defer to Danielle and the other board members, but I don't think they're intending this to be a 12-person board or a 12-person committee. But since we've added students, a faculty member, should we have a parent at large as a member of this as well?
And the other piece you could consider is what Danielle has and Tori, I'm sorry, but what Life has done, just another consideration, it's up to the board, but you could have, before you create kind of a large unwieldy position, to Mike's point, you could form the board committee, have the board do some work, because the recommendation I have is we really should wait until the session starts, because there's going to be some momentum. So we don't want to do duplicative work that will end up in legislation, and we would have to come back to it. So we would want to take our time, but the model that was used by the equity committee was to start that process, get a draft, and then have a process. You could do it a variety of ways. You could have an advisory group. You could make an appointment at that time, but then to come back and get input on that initial draft, so that, to Mike's point, you don't have a large group from the beginning. Because if you have a large group that has students and teachers and administrators and parents, it really makes it hard, especially since they are non-advisory in the end anyway. So another possibility is start the board work, get a couple of months into it, and then come up with whatever the committee wants for the process, whether it's creating advisory members of the committee or doing some other process through the students. They could do something else. So that's just another option.
I think if I may, I think the way it's written right now is good. I think I would like to encourage the students to participate in this committee, just because they are passionate about this topic. So if they want to be, advisory roles and named on this committee, I think that's a good idea to keep them on there. I think a faculty member could, weigh in and have some useful input, but I also agree, adding parents might be a little bit difficult because then how do we choose them? How do we pick them? I'd be open to, once the committee's formed and we have some of the groundwork done, putting it out to the parents and the larger student body, and the larger faculty, just kind of for input or feedback. And as always, I mean, our meetings are open to the public. So if any parent is feeling super passionate about this, I highly encourage them to tune into meetings. And I think that might be the best way to handle it.
Go ahead.
As committee members, would the student representative vote be the same as it is now in the general board?
But so would a community member or a faculty member. So you're an advisor. That said, I mean, it's about you. So the fact that having students on it is a great idea, and it will be I think we'll hit the ground running. But I do agree with what Mike says. Maybe there's an initial phase before everyone comes together with just the board doing an initial draft. I don't know. We can work on that, but the initial motion to form an electronics device policy committee, including Danielle, Tori, JB, Ben, Celia, Cashel, and Grady, and a faculty member in the future. We're gonna vote on that in a by-person vote. Okay. So starting with
Ashley, real quick,
yep.
can I just respond to the student who just spoke?
Yes, go ahead.
In the development of a policy, just like what we just saw Life bring forward, that is not a voting process. So I just wanted to clarify, did the student mean once the policy is presented, would they have a vote that counted differently than their current vote? Or did the student mean that in the development of the policy, would they have a voice in wording and creation and all of that? And I want to say that they, definitely any person that's part of the committee would have a full voice in what gets brought forward. So I just wanted to clarify what that student meant.
Yes, it's not really a voting thing. You're going to work on it. I mean, that's good point, Danielle. Exactly. Committees are just part of this bigger body. So the first vote will be to form the committee. Then we're going to do another motion to charge the committee with their job. So let's start with Bobby.
Vote yes.
Oh yeah, sorry. I should do the kids first. My bad. Celia, you can vote. She's a yes. Cashel? Yes. Grady? Bobby?
Yes.
JB? Cindy? Jonathan?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes.
Life? Tori?
Yes.
Danielle?
Yes.
Mike?
I guess yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And Steve Rosenberg?
Yes.
Okay, that will pass. Our next motion that we need to make is to charge this committee with this new committee, the Student Use of Electronic Devices and Policy Committee, to bring back policy recommendations by early May. Because right now we're going to focus on, what's that? It's right there. There we go. Oh, nice. We'll have a little birthday celebration with this policy. That sounds like teenage fun, right? Woo! Let's do that. Okay, so Cindy's got that language up there. Would someone please make the motion?
I would like to make that motion.
Second from JB. Okay, we're gonna vote it again. Celia. Cashel,
Yes.
Grady,
Yes.
Bobby, JB, Cindy, Jonathan,
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Corey,
Yes.
Life,
Yes.
Tori,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
Mike Bishop,
Yes.
Dan Rossioli,
Yes.
and Steve. Okay, that also will pass. Okay, the next action item is to authorize myself and Dr. Mike to acknowledge submission of the grant application for round 4 of the Environmental Protection Agency EPA Clean Bus Program. Does someone want to make that motion? Dan? Dan, do a second. Something's on somewhere. Oh, it's just you and me. Okay. Can we just do all those?
Yeah, do you want to address it first?
Yeah. Here, go ahead. Mike's going to talk about this for a second.
Some board members maybe remember close to 2 years ago, we were approached by a student group who was advocating for clean buses. And after doing some work, Lisa and I worked with our bus company, did some exploration. There was at that time round 3 of this program open. So we spoke to the board. The board submitted an application. It is solely lottery. Now we're a high priority district, listed as a high priority district, but we were not chosen in the lottery, so we could not apply. It is a good process. So the latest round came out in, and I think Dan shared it with me too. Was it September or October? Some like early October. So we were contacted by First Student. Do you want to apply? We had some conversation. And so our recommendation is to apply. I will say 2 pieces. First of all, there was discussion in the bus company and First Student has nationwide a lot of electric buses, so they have a lot of experience in it. They had conversations about our particular routes. So we are going to submit an application that the board approves in the lottery for up to 5 buses. In looking at our routes, some of our routes are longer. A lot of our routes go up hill roads, down dirt roads, and with their experience and the capacity of buses, our routes would only be conducive at this point to 5 buses that could make it through a full run, elementary and middle without recharging. So that's the piece that it will be an application for 5. There are other potential kinds of sources if we were to be selected, but that decision would still come back to this board for a final okay. So even if we were selected in the lottery, the board would still have to take action to move forward with those costs. That's one piece. The second piece is there was a recent election, if you have not heard, and it is unclear that whether a new administration with the president-elect would approve, especially with considering the new EPA administrator, whether this whole program will be scuttled before money would be allocated. So I will say that's also another big question mark right now. But it is our recommendation. I think there's a lot of benefits to electric buses. I know I've talked to some board members who also feel very strongly about that. So it's our recommendation to at least move forward and see if we'd be selected in that lottery, and let the board, if we are, the money is there, let the board make the decision at the time if you want to move forward with having First Student purchase it.
Well, in that case, why don't we just say, are there any objections or abstentions to this, to us putting in this application? Not hearing any or seeing any. Is there anything in Zoom? No. Do you have a question, Ben? Go ahead.
it was an obnoxious one. I was just wondering if Tesla had a bus, because then I guarantee you this will continue.
All right, that will pass with with no objections.
Hey, Ashley, it's Elizabeth. I just, just one comment. We just have a lot going on, so it's fine if we submit the application. I'm concerned about this being time consuming and just prioritization.
Go ahead.
We really appreciate those sentiments, Elizabeth. One of the benefits of having a bus company that's a national bus company is they have a dedicated person who does all of the logistics. So there's a few pieces we have to do. Ray has to get a certification through Washington Electric because the buses are housed at the bus barn here. They're their provider. So there's a little bit of time that has to occur, but it's not, at least then I don't think it's an onerous process. So because First Student has a grant writer who does most of the work on our behalf. So, but thank you for making that comment.
Okay, and then obviously the numbers once we get them too, because I don't think that it would be very difficult, I think, to go out to our taxpayers at this point in time in increasing our budget for this, but we'll get the information first.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so that passed. So the next action item is to approve participation in the Winooski Valley Regional Public School Choice Collaborative for the 24-25 school year in accordance with statute 822A and the Winooski Valley Regional Public School Choice Collaborative Articles of Agreement. Mike's going to speak to this. Oh, sorry, we need to do the motion. Does someone want to make a motion? JB makes a motion. Bobby, will you second? Bobby seconds. Okay. Let's hear about it.
First of all, this is a program where we are required to participate in public school choice, and that was defined by statute. I think it was from the mid-teens. So there is a process. There are some schools, mainly in the Chittenden County area, who go through the whole lottery process themselves. So there has to be a lottery process. It has to be an equitable process. It has to occur at the same time. Every student has to be given the opportunity, and it has to be acted in a uniform manner. Some board members may remember that we had a student who moved out of the district towards the end of a school year, and they wanted to keep their child here. When I explored it, we could not, because they missed the deadline for the lottery, we could not say, hey, we'll let the student come tuition free as part of the program. It has to be done in a equitable manner. Having said that, this is my third year, and board chair, previous board chair, current board chair, and I have put on the item that has been on for the past several years. I went back to 2017, 2018, and the numbers that we listed on the application are pretty similar. So this is an illustration where I think board oversight is very important, because we had a board member, Dan Rossioli, who said to me, are those numbers correct? So it is admittedly an area that I have not had a deep dive into the intricacies of the program, but I have learned a lot since I had that question. And what I will say is we made adjustments on the form, because at the end of the day, as we explored this program, it is by statute. So you can accept students 5% of your population, or 10, whatever is lower, and there is a range. And then you can send up to 10% or 40, whatever is lower. So I would say that this program, there is a perverse incentive. So we, as part of our funding, any student who leaves still is included in the sending district's ADM. So historically, this current year, I always get the numbers of what the lottery is. This current year, we are receiving 10 students from other school districts who are attending Harwood. We also are sending 8 students from Harwood to other districts. Those numbers, when I went back in the spreadsheets, have been pretty consistent. It's always been under 10 in each category. However, when I say the perverse incentive, there is no even though we listed 20 on the form, there is no incentive for the school district to have more than 10 students here because we don't receive ADM for the receiving students. So let's say the board said, oh, we only have to accept 10, but let's take 50 kids. And we had 50 kids apply and we had to hire 2 new teachers. We only had 10 students leave. It's costing us money. Reverse, you don't get, you can't say for students, because I had a question about what can we say if there are students in X surrounding school district that will accept you tuition. That schools won't pay, like we would not pay tuition to another school unless they were accepted as part of this program. So school districts will not say, yes, we'll voluntarily pay you tuition unless they're in that other bucket that Lisa talked about earlier. So as part of school choice for non-operating schools, we can receive students and receive tuition per students. So, which takes me to the point of a conversation Lisa and I had. We've always sent a bus down to the Granville, Warren, or Granville, Hancock area. This year, because of all of our restraints, we're still sending it down, but we're not making it as convenient to Granville and Hancock residents. It meets at the town line, but I will say to the board and to the finance committee, this is something you certainly should explore because they don't have operating schools. They go to 3 different places. I've had conversations with their superintendent, but I think we want, my recommendation would be that our district make it as attractive as possible to come to Harwood as an option for because right now we have 30 students and Lisa ran we updated the numbers, went through all our records, and I think what was it again, like 575,000 that the district receives.
72 this year, which is going to be great. And just to let you know, we have not all 30 students ride the bus. So there's about 12 students that ride the bus, and the bus goes to that new location, but then it also goes all the way to where we bring it back to town's office in the afternoon. So.
But as our recommendation that we stay at the 10 and that we move to the 10 and 40 number now that I've had a chance to really fully understand the ramifications. And what it means is once you are, so for students that we receive, once you are accepted into public school choice, the student stays unless they either graduate or the parents say, we don't want them to go to your school anymore. So every year that 10 number, even though the form, it's not a state mandated form, it's a regional coordinator form, even though the form sounds like it's yearly, that is the overall 4-year cap. So for this year, we are receiving 10 students. Of those 10 students, 6 were continuing students, and of those 6, 1, 2, 4 will graduate this year. So that means for this coming year, the form you're improving, we can receive, even though it says 10 on the form, that is the cap, according to our regional coordinator. We can in the lottery accept 4 new students regardless of grade. So, and that we are required to do by state law. Probably more information than you ever wanted to know about public school choice.
Just when you're looking at the calculus of what's to be cut and what's not, are you and Lisa sort of cognizant about revenue coming in? So meaning you're thinking in the back of your mind's like, oh, that's a source of revenue. We want to make sure we're protecting that. Okay, you're shaking your head. Yes. Okay.
Dan?
I actually want to know more about this. So outside of the Winooski program, with the Vermont school choice for towns that don't have schools, so Granville and Hancock in this discussion, the town pays that tuition, right? Can we negotiate with those towns to bring all of their students here?
It's their choice of where they want to go. You know, we want to incentivize for them to come because the more students come here, for both K through 12 and pre-K, it's additional revenue coming into us. I have to actually look in to see if we can market. I don't know. I have to find out more information on that.
We can make it attractive and be a welcoming district and do things. What I will say, what I've learned about both elements, about the public school choice, but also about the tuitioning is because of the geography of Vermont, a lot of decisions that people make are based on geography. So because of the size, students, families who reside in those towns, they generally choose their school based on what's closer. And even when I was having a conversation with our regional coordinator for Winooski, and we have a regional cooperative just because we have, we're a reasonable sized school, but we are smaller. So it's easier for us to pool our resources and have one person who does it for all of our schools to do it in an equitable manner. If you are a Champlain Valley, they do it on their own just because they have a larger scale and accept. So even though you don't have to have a regional consortium, we do because it's just easier for the schools in our region. But from talking to our regional coordinator, like Lamoille North, Cambridge, she sees a lot of applications from that region because they are actually closer to Mount Mansfield than they are to their school. So a lot of times families in Vermont will make decisions in these kinds of situations, whether it's tuitioning or public school choice based on where they live and where their students go, and making sure that they spend as less time as possible on the bus.
Great idea, though. Another one. I mean, it's just like you're talking about like the little pieces of low hanging or side hanging fruit. I mean, that is incentivizing those kids. That's 30 kids. That's a lot of kids. Okay. Where were we at with that? So we need to vote on, we can do okay, here's this come up. Yeah, we've made the motion. Have we made the motion on this? Yes.
And also, just if you have questions in these items, and this is an example of something that happens every year that, from time we don't always look into, but if you have questions on something, it is very important that you reach out to the board chair and she'll let me know and I'll do the research, and it really is helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, that
Thanks,
was
Dan.
Dan asking that question, I think yesterday morning or this morning, but it was a good question. Okay, so we've made this motion to, now we're looking, does anyone do we have any objections or abstentions on doing this? Zoomers? To approve the participation in this? I don't see any. Okay, not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. So that's our action items. And now we have the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes approving the minutes from 11/6. And it also includes approving the warrants from 11/6, which was $654,506.89. Do I have a motion to pass the consent agenda from JB? Do we have a second? Second from Life. Any objections or abstentions to passing this consent agenda? Okay, not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. Our last thing today is a very short, hopefully, executive session. So if you are a student or you are not on the board, you are done.